The information shared on Light Body Radio is for educational and informational purposes only. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed healthcare provider, or qualified wellness practitioner with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or health goal. Dr. Lara May, her guests, and affiliates do not claim to cure, prevent, or treat any condition and are not responsible for any actions taken based on the information shared in this podcast. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that you are responsible for your own health decisions and that any actions you take based on the content are at your own discretion and risk. Thank you for tuning in to Light Body Radio.
Welcome to Light Body Radio, where science meets soul and healing gets multidimensional. I am your host, Dr. Lara May, functional medicine pharmacist, master intuitive Reiki channel, and certified life and health coach. Here we decode root causes, transmute stuck energy, and empower your full spectrum healing journey, body, mind, and light body. This isn't just wellness, it's awakening, grounded in science, guided by spirit, and designed for your evolution. Let's rise and radiate. Welcome to the next level of you. Hello and welcome to Light Body Radio. I am your host, Dr. Lara May, and today we have with us Dr. Michael Donovan, PhD. He is a physiologist, performance coach, and host of the Performance Lab podcast. He helps high-performing professionals and former athletes rebuild strength, energy, and confidence through science-based training, wearable tech, and highly personalized comeback coaching. With over 20 years of experience in NIH research, public health, and elite fitness, Michael brings deep empathy, real-world insight, and a client-centered approach to every transformation. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. I'm excited to talk about this whole concept of comeback coaching and how to rebuild strength from a burnout perspective or life transitions or whatever, setbacks come your way. So how did you become passionate about this specific area?
Yeah, it's kind of a theme that's bubbled up with most of my clients, and they come to me for a variety of different reasons. But I think when I look across all of my clients over the last probably 2 or 3 years, one of the things that they had in common is that they have a past experience of being an athlete, and not that they just. It was more than just something they did. Like, it was their identity. I kind of stereotype saying like it's the football player, the quarterback walking through the strutting through the high school hall with his Letterman jacket on, and like he just there's just an aura about him, that he is an athlete, and I think even that individual, and I've had some individuals like that, whether it was injury or it was, family life got in the way or career got in the way, they just completely lost that persona. And it wasn't bravado at the time. It was truly like an embodiment of the fullest expression of themselves, being confident and being, really the fully themselves. And then just sometimes decades of other things got in the way, and they lost that air about them. And it's just hidden. I think, once you have that, it doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away. It just sometimes gets hidden by other things and deprioritized. And so that's one of the things that through the personalization that I bring to my coaching, we bring that out. And I think it's something that's pretty unique because particularly as men, stereotypically, we don't talk about identity and emotions and these kinds of things. And I think it's really, really important. So that empathy and understanding that, because I have been an athlete my whole life, I don't think I lost that identity. I see it in others, and I want to bring that back to the surface.
Yeah, for sure. I can definitely resonate with that. I also identify as an athlete, and I know my husband does as well. So I can definitely totally see, like, once you've, dedicated your life to something, even when, life comes along and kids and job and other things, like, it's still a part of your life. And so what have you seen are both the biggest challenges, but also maybe some misconceptions that we have around getting back into shape, like in our 40s and maybe even after that, depending on our journey?
I heard a quote recently that I think speaks to this, that the difference between hard and easy is if you know how to do it. And I think sometimes the inertia, that the perceived inertia of overcoming the barriers in the way, the perception is so great that you're like, I want to get there, but there's so many steps that I need to, take, and so many things I need to change. I'll just do the easy thing. I'll just, like, let's take nutrition, for example. I'd love to have the time to, look at meals and recipes and buy the ingredients and cook and all these kinds of things. And maybe those are things that the individual enjoyed in the past, right? But it's just easy and convenient to order, pre-prepped meals. And there's nothing wrong with that, but generally the variety is not going to be there. You don't have full control over the nutrition. It's not personalized to what you really need to eat from a macro or a micronutrient standpoint. And so you're, as I like to say, you're suffusizing, like, it's sufficient, but it's not optimal. And I think with the help of a coach, and anyone really, from a objective perspective, can look at habits and behaviors and actions and such, and see, is this really moving the needle as much as you could with the same amount of effort? And I think I'll just give another example that I see all the time when I go to any kind of gym, whether it's a CrossFit gym or a big box gym, or Planet Fitness, or any, Gold's Gym, LA Fitness. I mean, even Equinox. You see people, and I just think, the same people over and over and over doing just accessory lifts and these ancillary things, rather than like training their primary movers, or someone who's really, really strong, just lifting all the time, not focusing on cardio and conditioning, right? And not cardio in the sense we've kind of pigeonholed it as being to burn calories, but conditioning to strengthen our cardiovascular system. And so I think it to be an athlete, some athletes are really specialized. And I mean, to be a discus thrower or something like that, or a baseball player, even, where there's a lot of rotation in one direction, there are going to be maladaptations in that direction that, for that particular case, totally makes sense. But once you evolve beyond that specific use case, being generally holistically fit, being mobile, having good conditioning, being strong but not overly strong. There's no use to being able to squat 500 pounds and deadlift 400 pounds for most people. It's a good party trick, but it's not. There's not a lot of utility in that. And then also recovering well, having good nutrition. All of these things are really essential. They're not optional to me. And I think to really be a fully well-rounded athlete, you have to hit on all of these things. And that's overwhelming for most people, right? It's like, if you're not doing any of those, and I say, this is what you should do, it's going to be overwhelming to, by yourself. And you're going to say, well, I don't even know where to start. Right. So.
Yeah, and I think especially too, if your background was in something super specialized, like the example that you gave was, like the shot put, or, or something, or like you said, like even a baseball player, because it is usually sort of like, focused on one side of your body. I think, depending on what your experience was, whether it was high school and college, and even beyond that, maybe even to like the professional aspect, it can be sort of like confusing, like, oh, what do I do now? I've learned this thing. I was an expert at this one type of, athleticism behavior for so long, but now what do I do now that I'm not in that realm, but I still want to be active and healthy and in good shape and feel good? And so, how do I approach that? Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I know for me, I was a swimmer in high school and college. And so, transitioning out of that, like figuring out, okay, what can I do to feel good, stay strong, be in shape, and also balance that with life, because there's job, there's kids, there's, all the things. And so now in this stage of my life, I really train for those fun activities that I like to do, whether it's skiing or snowboarding, or, my husband and I are backcountry hunters. And so, like we have to train to carry heavy loads and, go long distances, but yet at the same time, I'm not much of a fan of running. And so, but, or like preserving my knees at this stage of the game too. So there's so many different factors. And I love that you are getting very personalized with your clients. And so, what are some of those first things that you assess when someone comes to you, maybe feeling burnout or like completely disconnected, or, feeling that like, okay, this is something that I had once in my life and it's gotten away from me. How do I get back there?
Yeah, the first most important thing, to your point, with backcountry hunting and these kinds of things, that's a very specific goal that not everyone shares. So like, I don't want to prepare someone for backcountry hunting if they want to do a triathlon. And so just being, or as you said, maybe it's just I just want to be able to continue doing what I'm doing now for the next decade, right? And I believe that a lot of men particularly reach a point, that's who I primarily work with, who sometimes they think their best days are behind them, not ahead of them, and generally it's in that 50 to 60-year-old range where they start feeling their knees and start feeling their hips and the pains when they, either the next day after skiing, as you said, or doing a big hike and hiking downhill, right? Or maybe it's first thing in the morning when you get out of bed and you're a little creaky and stiff. And I think the challenge in our modern society is that, unfortunately, that's kind of taken as normal. It's normalized that, like, at a certain age, you're gonna feel old, and I hear 30-year-olds saying that I'm just getting old, and I don't subscribe to that. So once we've established what your goal is, we need to then, that's sort of, I like to use a sort of airplane analogy, like that's our destination, that's where we're flying to, and we need to then identify what's our departure city, where are we flying from, and so doing a baseline testing of all of the components that I mentioned before. So looking at wearable data to assess recovery and sleep and stress and these kinds of things, and then nutrition to look at how is that influencing inflammation and recovery, and supporting your workouts with the timing of when you're eating. And then really doing a deep dive on conditioning, strength, and mobility. And when we have all those sort of 5 primary areas clear, then we can produce the flight plan to get from our departure city to our end goal, our arrival city. And generally that's 3 to 4 months as a minimum, sometimes 6 to 9 months, depending on how deconditioned the person is. But we're basically adapting and tweaking the program every other week to make sure that, again, to use that analogy, it seems like the plane's going on a straight line, but actually it's veering left and right the entire flight. So we're doing the same thing with our workout plan, and it's not always exactly on where we want to be. Sometimes it's too intense, sometimes it's not intense enough. And I do have an adage that one of the problems with sort of cookie cutter programs that you might download from one of the many sites out there is that it's not tailored to the intensity you need. And so sometimes it's not about overtraining, but under recovering. And that's difficult to differentiate if you're just following a template, because that stimulus needs to be not too much, and so that you're not getting the stimulus you need. But I find a lot of times it's not enough. The intensity is not enough to actually produce the results the athletes want.
And when you say intensity, is that a time factor, a weight factor, a combination of both in terms of duration and, how heavy are we lifting? I know specifically for women, there's this whole misconception of, if I lift heavy, that I'll get bulky. And, I even talk about this with my clients in general. It's that I kind of ask them the question, like, do you realize how hard and how long you would have to train, and all the extra, let's say, peptides or supplements you would have to take in order to truly get bulky at like a competitive, fitness or like performance, what do you call that? Not the
bodybuilding.
Yeah, bodybuilding, or like a figure athlete.
Yeah.
Like that's like you're not even close to that. So like we're just lifting to preserve muscle mass, which is also then going to help your bone density and that piece of longevity specific. I mean, it definitely goes into effect for men too, but I mean, men have the benefit of, steady testosterone. So that really does help them when it comes to that. But do you find this as well?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned time, and I think that's that's the denominator that all of these things need to be kind of adjusted against, right? And so if you have 15 hours a week to train, you're practically a professional athlete at that, or you're an Ironman athlete who's getting up, every morning and training, and then and you don't have it's hard to have a life of family and work and things if you're training, 15 to 20 hours a week. And so we're generally probably talking 6 to 10 hours a week, which is plenty for most people, and maybe even less than that, maybe even half of that. But we can, in that amount of time, maximize the response to the stimulus that you're doing. And I think, this is said many times, but it's worth saying again, that you don't get stronger by lifting, you get stronger by recovering from the stimulus of the lift, right? So you need to build in that rest time, and that's why we don't lift emphasize, if you're doing a bodybuilding type workout or physique type workout, you don't do the same muscle groups on back-to-back days, because those muscle groups need time to recover. And that's also true not just of the primary mover big muscles that we see, the aesthetic ones, but the stabilizers, the smaller muscles, and the joints and the ligaments and tendons and all of that. And then what particularly gets overlooked is the stimulus on the nervous system, and how easy, when you're doing really technical mountain biking or technical skiing, as you mentioned, like your risk of injury goes up exponentially when your nervous system gets over stimulated, and so your muscles might feel good, your joints might feel good, but sometimes that's why out of the blue injuries happen, because our nervous system's not firing as sharply as it was on day one when you're skiing for 4 days in a row or something like that. And so I think even in the gym doing movements like jumping rope or doing box jumps or these kinds of things, apply anything plyometric, really anything where you're jumping or you're doing a dynamic movement like that. In CrossFit, it's the Olympic lifts like snatches and clean and jerks and these kinds of things. There's a tremendous tax on the nervous system. There's a cost to doing those kinds of things day after day after day. And it requires more recovery than just doing slower movements and not less dynamic movements like bench press or squat or these kinds of things. So the risk of injury again goes up, and then you have to balance that risk toward reward ratio and just sprinkle those in more sporadically and not do plyometrics every single day. And even lifting super heavy taxes the nervous system. So really heavy deadlifts or really heavy squats or these kinds of things, when you're moving a weight through a large range of motion, can be really demanding on the whole body. And we're talking about something that not a lot of athletes I work with are in that realm, and in the general population it's probably a small fraction, but maybe those are listening to this, that will be listening to this conversation. So I want them to just be aware that it's often overlooked, the emphasis, the impact of our movement day after day after day, the cumulative impact on our nervous system.
Yeah, well, I think it's so important that you brought that up, because one thing that has been mentioned a couple times just in the type of people that come to you are those that are already dealing with burnout. And so if your nervous system is already fried, then you probably don't want to pile on a bunch of HIIT workouts, like super high intensity, because that's just going to blow out your adrenals and or not really lend itself to healing that cortisol balance and that cortisol cycle that we need to be really coming back to that homeostasis point, especially if, and I would say I think a lot of people are dealing with some level of burnout, whether they realize it or not, and in this day and age, and especially once you're in, that decade, that magical decade of your 40s and, early 50s. Again, I work primarily with women, but still with men too. We all have stressors. We struggle to find balance with everything. And so, it's okay, I spend this amount of time at work. It's stressful in and of itself. And then I have to figure out how I'm going to fit in a workout. And then, sometimes just the thought of these things can stress us out. So let's talk a little bit about the mindset shifts that are required for this to be successful, if you don't mind.
Sure. I want to just follow up quickly on, and then we'll go to mindset, but I want to just throw one other thing out, because I think one of the things when we talk about recovery, sometimes we think of sauna and cold plunge now, right? That's one of the very popular
for sure
contrast therapy, right? And then even some supplements and nutrition, right? And in some cases, those kinds of things can be really beneficial. And a lot of people are doing, I do cold plunge, but a lot of people are doing cold plunge because it's hard, right? And it releases this, they're not relaxed at all when they're in this freezing cold, and I've actually acclimated pretty well, especially being here in Denver, and my cold plunge is around 40 degrees, and now I can get in water that's anywhere warmer than that, and it feels great. But sometimes we don't need that added stimulus when you're verging on burnout, and so I think when a lot of people want an easy yes or no answer, or might ask you, what do you think about this, right? And I think it's it's so unsatisfying to say, well, it depends, right?
Oh yeah,
but
that's always my answer, is it depends.
Right. but what it depends on, I think, is your level of kind of stimulation, and if you could quantify, like if you just asked, I asked at the beginning of a lot of the talks I give, on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed do you feel over the last week? And I've gotten the majority of the audience is a 6 or above. Many times in these groups of performing guys, particularly, they're 8, 9, 10 out of 10, and so for them, I would say, don't cold plunge. You do not need any more stimulus like that. You have enough yang in your life. You need more yin, and that balance and that homeostasis, and that's really, really important. And again, I think gets overlooked because it's like, well, Steve is doing the cold plunge, and so his friend John wants to do it too, and it's kind of keeping up with the Joneses. So you were asking about mindset and the what specifically about mindset?
Well, I mean, just the themes or the trends that you see with your clients that has come up. Like, what are those things that we need to shift in order to really help us be successful in this journey of reestablishing, the conditioning, or again, like whatever the goal is, like whether it's an event, a competition, or maybe it's just, like feeling good in your body again. Yeah.
So I think part of it is about vision in a way. And I was working with a coach last year who was talking about, his whole coaching is around vision. And the reason that's really important for what we're talking about is because it's not just the guiding light of what you're saying yes to, the workouts and the going to bed early maybe, and eating a little bit better, and doing the running when you don't want to run, but you want to be fit. It's what you're saying no to. And a lot of that's just a reframing. Like getting up early in the morning is saying no to staying up late the night before, right? And eating better is saying no to the unhealthy foods or that extra portion that you were doing before. And even though that seems really, really simple, I've found it kind of profound in some of my clients, because it's sometimes easier to say no to something than it is to establish a new habit or a new ritual or a new routine. And I think the other thing is these guys know how to work hard in business, as fathers, in other realms, but they're not used to doing that or smarter. They don't just take a lackadaisical, like, whatever we do in the business. It's like spreadsheets and, the hiring, assistants and staff and VAs and these kinds of things. It's a very intense scrutiny of like, am I doing this the right way? The optimization in the business realm, because it's clear what the output is. It's clear that if I do these things, step A, step B, step C, it leads to a higher bottom line, right? But it's, physical transformations don't necessarily, they're not as apparent in that way, and so you kind of have to just trust the process and trust the coach that they know that if you do A and B and C, you will get the physical result or the mental result, you want. And so that's one of them. It is around mindset, I think, because it's translating what because a lot of people have a hard time doing something they've never done before, whether it's starting a business as an entrepreneur or it's doing I was a CrossFit coach for a long time, and people walk into the gym and rope climbs were one of the exercises for the day, and they say, I don't know how to climb a rope. Well, you don't know how to climb a rope yet. I can teach you, right? And then the next time the workout comes up with rope climbs, they know how to climb a rope. So, I think as adults, we don't as often as when we're growing up take on new things that we've never done before. And we kind of, our skill set and our mentality and our mindset is around like, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I don't do, or I can't do, or won't do. And so bringing those things kind of close to each other, so you can say, well, you're doing this in your business, let's apply those same skills, those same techniques, those same habits to your workouts, or to your meal planning, or to your stress reduction. And then it makes it a little bit easier of a transition going from where they are to where they want to be.
Beautiful. I love it. I think there's a lot of things that, especially if someone has taken a break from the fitness world, things that we need to sort of deprogram, like, because, when I was growing up, it was all about the cardio to lose weight, cardio to burn calories. And even honestly, as a swimmer, you're spending hours in the pool. That's cardio. I mean, there is some wait time for sure, but it's mostly hours in the pool. And so I think there's this aspect too of maybe some unlearning of those old tenets that no longer apply. Like, we have research backed approaches now. Like, we know some things better now than we did, 10, 20 years ago. And so I think it's important, if we're going to seek out an expert like yourself, maybe to, like, allow our minds to be open a little and to learn, like you said, learn the new thing, and understand that, what's going to serve you today is going to be different than what served you 10 and 20 years ago. A lot, because your body is different, but your life is different. The science and the research is different, and your goals are different. So there's so much, I think, that goes into that too, that I think is important for people to keep in mind. But I want to take us now to the wearables, because that's a huge thing. I mean, they're everywhere. You can have the watch, you can have the ring. There's a variety of things out there. So tell us a little bit about those. And you say most people don't know how to use them, even though they have them and they think they're using them every day. So let's start there.
Yeah, I started using a wearable. It's funny you say like 20 years ago, and a lot has changed. I recently published on my blog like sort of evolution of fitness from 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0, and wearables have been a part of that to some extent, really not so much in 1.0. 1.0 was like bodybuilding and Taibo and step aerobics and that era. But in the 90s even and early 2000s, heart rate monitors became popular, and I was doing a lot of endurance, long distance endurance stuff like triathlons, 5-6 hours, and I wanted to make sure that I was not, on my easy days, not going too hard. And so that was my primary reason for using a heart rate monitor. And I think that's still one of the best applications of any wearable, is monitoring the intensity of the stimulus, and then also following up HRV and other recovery metrics, and monitoring your response to that stimulus. So I talk about this a lot, the stimulus and the response, and optimizing for both. And I think the biggest mistake people make in wearables is zooming in too much, and they wake up in the morning and they pull out their phone and they look at, what was my sleep the night before, and you forget that your sleep last night was influenced most likely by what you did the day before, and your sleep the night before, right? So we're looking,
Mhm.
we should at least zoom out like 48 hours, usually 72 hours to have the context for that sleep score you had last night, right? And I think that's applicable for all of the wearable data, that the most important thing is seeing the patterns and the trends and the outliers. And what was the thing you ate, for example, that spiked your glucose? If you're seeing a glucose monitor, like way out of range, because anything you eat with carbohydrates is going to make your blood sugar go up. But what then, not just what spiked it, but what was the response on the other end? What was your
Right.
body's response to that, right? And so I think looking over weeks, I mean, I like to go as far back, just carrying your phone around in your pocket or wearing your watch, even without programming it for workouts, just passively, it's picking up a lot of data. And so the first thing I do with any clients who have really anything, again, it could just be their phone or a watch they're wearing passively, is go back as far as we can, like years, and look at the patterns and trends, as opposed to looking acutely too quickly. And then I think that I hope with AI and all of the startups that are coming out in this space, that there'll be a really good dashboard soon that consolidates all of the wearables. But to my knowledge, there's not one single one yet that I haven't found one that makes it really easy for the consumer, not for a coach, right, but for the consumer to really get a big picture view, a snapshot of all of these inputs. And if you don't have that, if it's not distilled down to the real meat of it, you just become overwhelmed, because it's just like you have, one of my good friends says, it's not the amount of data, it's not more information that helps us, it's actionable information. And so any information that's not actionable, like pretty immediately actionable, is really a distraction. And so finding that signal in the noise of what should I pay attention to, what can I really use to guide my programming, to guide my day today. And I think the other mistake people often make, and I'll just use the example of sleep, is there's a recommendation recently, I think I've heard a lot, to delay looking at your sleep score until you've been awake for half an hour or so, and you get to assess, how did I sleep? How rested do I
How do I
feel?
feel?
And then
Yeah.
you can compare it to the score, and I would say the same thing with workouts. A lot of my friends and I have a Garmin, and so after, often, when you save your workout, it pops up, here's the intensity, and here's the strain, right, and here's how long you should rest. And it's often like days, and it's like, no, I'm gonna ride tomorrow, and like I'm gonna feel fine, so that algorithm's not quite dialed in. But I think if someone was new to this and just using that, they might say, well, oh, I can't do anything for the next 3 days because I did this one hard workout. And so I don't think we're quite there yet on the technology side, but I do think we need to have a blend of trusting our subjective experience and aligning that with the objective data. And I think that's the most powerful thing. I was working with a client recently here in Colorado who was training for the triple bypass ride, and he was feeling so good leading up to it. He ended up riding from his house to the start of the ride, and then doing the whole ride, and then riding home. So he was just
Wow.
really a success story. But he was using a continuous glucose monitor, and he's not diabetic, just using it for athletic purposes, and also had a variety of other devices, an Oura Ring and a Garmin watch. And I asked him for all of that. I mean, we were looking at all of that data, but I also asked him to put it aside for a bit and just experience what he would like, note what he was experiencing during his training sessions. And then we could then compare without any bias of the actual data. I mean, generally the data is not what's biasing, it's other things, but his perception of intensity or recovery and these kinds of things could be biased by these numbers, right? And so after all of that, you know, on the next call, we looked at, he kept track every day of his sleep and of his recovery sensation and his workout intensity, these kinds of things, and then also his feeling of hunger, like during rides and that sort of thing. And we matched that, we overlaid that with his actual data, and we saw what mattered and what didn't matter for him. And I think this is truly, in my view, what I call fitness 3.0, where we're incorporating all of these things, smart testing and wearable data, and, you know, blood tests and all of this technology, and even sensors and AI and things that we won't even, you know, at the pace things are accelerating, we don't even know what's to come in 3 or 4 years, you know. But we might have as many sensors on ourselves as we do on our bikes to measure cadence and speed and all these kinds of things. Who knows? But yeah, I think ultimately, I think that there's sometimes an over reliance on the technology piece, and the biggest takeaway is that I think there has to be a good blending of your perceived experience, your intuition, and the technology, not just relying on the technology.
For sure. Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, even yesterday I was out for a hike up here in Truckee. So like, you know, around 6,000 feet of elevation going up to about 7,000. So I was only looking about, you know, 1,000 feet of a vertical gain, which in the big scheme of things is not that much. But I had been down on the coast for the last 3 days at sea level. And so I was definitely at the beginning feeling it. And I'm, you know, looking at my watch, and I also use a Garmin. And I was thinking, I was like, I had, you know, some real aspirations for this hike today. We'll see what actually, you know, materializes, or if this windedness is just me getting through my warm up phase, you know, and my heart, you know, waking up and to, you know, the oxygen saturation in the air right now. So, and, you know, it actually ended up being more productive than I thought it would in the end when I got done. And then I looked at my watch, I was like, oh, I went a lot farther. I did it in faster time, you know, because there is that, you don't have to be at sea level for long to lose that conditioning to elevation. But anyway, you're right, like listening to your body and just going with it, instead of obsessing about it. But on the other end of the spectrum, I want to ask you, when you're, let's say, like in the midst of the workout, are there metrics that you can use on your wearable in real time to help optimize that? I would imagine that looking, like knowing your heart rate ranges in terms of, you know, aerobic, lactic acid threshold into anaerobic, I'm assuming that's important and that can really help. But are there other things, or is that the main thing? Like, how do you address that?
To optimize for the
workout that you're in, like in terms of, I don't know, just like feeling good through it, or I guess it also depends on the goal for that workout of the day too. But I don't know. Can you give us like some different examples in terms of like how maybe we could do that?
Yeah, I'm going to recommend a book that kind of speaks to this being, well, I guess I would say the perception of intensity. Okay. Is one of the things we're talking about. And there's a book by Alex Hutchinson called Endure. And so for anyone who is interested in endurance sports, he talks about the Nike campaign to break the 2-hour marathon barrier and a variety of things, and talks about altitude and hydration and all these kinds of things. But he also really emphasizes the difference between our body limiting us and our mind limiting us, and those aren't always in sync. And so a lot of times what I find with people who call themselves runners, their identity as an athlete is a runner. They don't, they go out and they may have a lot of miles. I mean, some guys I know training for marathons are running up to 100 miles a week. I mean, almost like professional level runners, and they're not professional level, but doing, qualifying for Boston and these kinds of things. But they're focused mostly on distance, not as much intensity. And I think intensity is one of the most important things, because intensity to some extent is subjective. And a lot of times it is our mind that says, wait, tone that back. I can't maintain this level of effort. Right. And especially when you go to elevation, right. I'm here at, Mile High, and was hiking over the weekend at 10,000 feet. And done several 14ers recently. And, your perception of exertion, really, I think, regulates your pace and these kinds of things. So what ends up happening, I think, when you go to higher elevations, often you unconsciously are regulated by your perception, and you don't feel out of breath because you're just going 80%. And so if you don't look at your pace and you're not guided by your pace, you're going to, stay at that level of perceived exertion, which is a great metric, I think, for a lot of training. And so that's actually what I would initially sort of suggest people do, is just go by their perception, and maybe even set a goal for that workout of I'm going to make this an 8 out of 10 today, and I didn't sleep well last night, and whatever factors traveled over the last couple of days, I'm going to go a 6 out of 10. And then look and see, based on elevation, based on, environmental conditions, like, is it the middle of July in Texas, or, is it winter time, right? All of these factors, hydration level, all of these things actually impact, both your perception and the actual intensity. And then after the workout, kind of sync those things up. And especially, again, over a week, look at that. And I think that's a better approach to looking at it, rather than in the workout, but I think ultimately, when I was saying a lot of runners go by distance, I think they're unconsciously pacing themselves by perception, and they're often just doing, like, I'm going to run this at an average of this pace, right? A 7-minute mile or whatever for 10 miles. And I think not mixing in enough intervals and tempo runs and these kinds of things. And the biggest value, I think, for anyone, I would, unless there's something that is preventing you from running at a high intensity, I think sprinting is one of the things that most people don't incorporate into their training. And it's because it feels terrible, right? Because you're going, close to 100%, and you feel gassed, but I just prescribed for one of my athletes, just basically kind of double inverse Tabata. So like 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off. Anytime his gym workout didn't feel like enough, just start on day, week 1 or day workout 1 with 6 sprints, 6 20-second sprints, and then 7, 8, 9, 10 in consecutive days, and then go back to 6. And so you're doing, it's 6 minutes. Anybody can do 6 minutes, right? And anybody can do 10 minutes, and I think if people incorporated that level of all out intensity, which we rarely do, because it's such a novel stimulus, you're going to get a novel response. And that's, I'm not saying that's going to, burn enough calories to make a difference or anything like that. But I think what it does is raise your perception of exertion, so that when you go at a pace lower than that, you're like, oh, this is easy, you know, and you could begin to cut the rest and maintain that duration of sprinting, or you could increase the duration of the work. But there's a lot of things to play with in that, and it's just 10 minutes at most. And so I think for a lot of people that's what I would recommend in that realm.
Awesome. I love it. So tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, my website is factfueledfitness.com. And you can reach out there. There's a contact me page. Also Dr. Michael Donovan on Instagram and Facebook.
Cool. Perfect. And we'll put all these links on our show notes page too, so people can find them. Any last words of wisdom or anything you'd like to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
The one thing that gets overlooked with those who don't know me super well is that they see I have a PhD, and they see I publish a lot, and I'm on podcasts, and I do all of this, but I really love to play. And I think sometimes we get a little bit too serious this wasn't a super serious conversation, but sometimes we get really serious about our things that should be play. And, you know, I think when we think about growing up as kids, we were playing sports, you know, and that's what it meant to be an athlete, was to play a sport. And if we take that same mindset, you know, we're talking about some things that are really, really important, but they don't have to be serious. And so that's what I'd like to leave with, is that just adopting that love, rekindling that love of play can be really supportive for this whole process.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. It should be fun. Yeah. So awesome. Well, thank you so much. And everyone, make sure you check him out on Instagram or Facebook, Dr. Michael Donovan, and his website, factfueledfitness.com. And we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you for joining me on Light Body Radio, where functional medicine meets intuitive healing and transformation happens on every level. If this episode resonated with you, please like, share, and if you're ready to go deeper, visit drlaramay.com to book a functional medicine consultation or an intuitive healing session. Whether you need to rebalance your body, clear your energetic blocks, or reconnect with your soul's purpose, I've got you. You can also follow me on Instagram or TikTok at Dr. Lara May for daily inspiration, energy updates, and healing tools. Remember, your healing is multidimensional, and so are you. Until next time, honor your body, trust your intuition, and activate your light.